This is Peter Helland, and I have a guest here, Paul Ford O'Neill, and he's going to help me here address this topic, theistic evolution in the Catholic Church, which we've been doing quite a bit lately. I actually have a friend that I used to live with, went to Notre Dame, and he's an attorney here in town, and one time he says, he wanted me, this is like a while back, 20 years ago, he said he really wanted me to talk more on evolution. Well, I knew it was really important, but it's very hard to broach that subject here at Notre Dame. But recently, a fellow wrote a book, and I brought this up, an 80-year-old fellow wrote the book, The Evolution of Catholic Unbelief, and he wrote, a couple years before that, Creation, Evolution, and Catholicism, and just recent, well, more 13 years ago, a priest wrote a book on creation. Basically what those guys are supporting, six-day creation, which was unheard of for the Catholic Church in the last 70 years. Now, Paul, his dad went to Notre Dame. Just a quick one on Paul. I think he graduated in '46. He was the head of the track team, but Paul's from Seattle, so you went, maybe did your brother go or somebody went, but he went to the main Catholic university in Washington State, which was Gonzaga, a Jesuit university. And evolution played a big factor there because the Jesuits followed indirectly, how do you say Teilhard de Chardin, okay? Because he had a building named after him on the campus there at Gonzaga.
Yeah, yes.
And evolution became, and theistic evolution became real prominent in the Catholic Church to the point that if somebody believed in what the early church fathers did believe, that the earth was no older than 6,000 or 7,000 years, and Adam and Eve, Adam was created on the sixth day of creation, those people that believed that were labeled fundamentalist, and the Catholic identity collectively said, we are not that. We are not these fundamentalists who believe in six-day creation. But now all of us, lately though, there's a movement in the Catholic Church identifying themselves as these fundamentalists that were demonized. So this is an unbelievably huge shift, okay? And the scripture that is pertinent here, and usually they go to Matthew 19, but Mark 10 might even be better, where Jesus says, and he's talking about marriage, and the Pharisees came to Jesus, and this was a hot issue, and they asked Jesus, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? They're trying to entrap him. And Jesus answered and said to them, well, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And Jesus answered and said unto them, for the hardness of your heart he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So there's only one question to ask, and that is, what did Jesus and the apostles teach on creation? And this is a good starting point. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So if somebody asked, what is the teaching of Jesus and the apostles? The apostles' doctrine, the apostles' creed. What did they teach on creation? I think if you did an end around on modern scholarship, what would you find to be the church's answer throughout the centuries? What did Jesus and the apostles teach on this issue? Now I can jump right to it. I had a class at Notre Dame, the graduate program, Josephine Ford. She was world-renowned Greek scholar, and it was Pauline epistles, and I asked her in the class that question. I said, what did Jesus and the apostles teach on the issue of creation? did they hold to the account in Genesis literally? She said, yes, they did. They held the 6-day creation. They held to that account. Well, I kind of knew, you know, what we were supposed to think. And I said, well, how come we don't think that way now? She said, well, we know more than they knew back then. And I've heard bishops, you know, say this. Okay, so that's the only thing they can say. Because once they uphold evolution, or theistic evolution, then they have to do something with what Jesus and the apostles taught. Mm-hmm. And the explanation is, well, we now know more about science and how things actually happened. Okay, so you actually were one of the few going into the Catholic educational system. Now, did you go to Catholic grades? I should know this. Catholic grade school and high school?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you had the whole shebang.
Well, 4 years of public high school.
Okay.
So I got a slap of, I don't know, secularism for 4 years that was interesting to say the least. Just, I literally had to walk kitty corner across the school from the Immaculate Conception grade school to the Everett High School. So
near Seattle,
yeah.
right above Seattle. Okay, so grade school, okay, you had Catholic school, then you had public high school, and then you went to probably the premier Catholic college in Washington, is Gonzaga?
Yeah, it was a toss-up. The Jesuits had the market on both sides of the Cascades, as we called it, in Seattle University, which was very famous in the 60s for their basketball team, which I believe won a national championship, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
And then now, of course, Gonzaga now takes that crown, and as we speak here on February 19, 2020, I'm sure Gonzaga, when you mention that to anybody, they immediately say, oh, the basketball team? You know, that's all they're known for.
That's what puts these places on the map.
On the map.
Okay, but you did not buy into the evolution right away, or apparently you never did. Okay, that's a rarity.
I'd like to say I never really did, but of course, in any situation in life, you kind of have to go along to get along a little bit. So it's not like I was asking the evolutionary questions in the classes I took, although I do remember challenging a gentleman named Dr. William Barry, who was a science teacher at Gonzaga. And the book we were reading out of, literally in chapter 4 or 5, begins with a poem he had written. And it was an evolutionary poem, but the poem is entitled Ooze. Okay, so it starts with the word ooze, and then, I don't know, I can't remember the rest of the poem, but it goes through the whole panoply of human existence up to the point of nuclear confrontation and destruction of the planet, and then it goes back to ooze. And I thought to myself, is that what's going to happen to us? Because remember, in the 70s, the late 70s, Jimmy Carter's era, there was still plenty of tension in the world, and it didn't get much better under Ronald Reagan. So, but Dr. Barry literally wrote this poem, and the publishers of this book put it in the science book we were studying out of. So naturally, that's the book we got when we were in a year of his science classes.
Okay, let me approach it this way. The title of the show is Theistic Evolution in the Catholic Church. Now, the leadership of the Catholic Church generally picks its leaders who have gone through the educational system in some fashion.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so I'm going to give the example. So when I went, I got accepted into Notre Dame early my senior year. So I went to visit, since I already decided I'm going, I went to visit toward end of February with a friend, and it just so happened, well, my sister was there at St. Mary's. I had cousins at Notre Dame. And my sister, this is back when they didn't have any girls at Notre Dame, so my sister had like 7 guys she hung with. Okay. And these guys were very smart, because my sister wanted to be around the smartest people. Okay. And she could pull it off. I mean, you know, she was pretty, and she seemed like she always had these 7 guys that she was with.
Kimmy's clan.
Yeah. So I'm with these guys for the 3 days that we're there, hanging out, and they always had one theme. It was a strange theme, and the theme was, we are, they would say it, I'm not going to say the exact words, but we are effed up, We don't know why we're effed up, and anybody that comes here will get effed up.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, I mean, I got the message really clear, and when I went back home, I told my dad I'm not going, okay? Because this is a sheer disaster. I'm talking to the most brilliant, and then when I interviewed everybody that I could,
Right.
you know, basically it was close to that, okay? So I couldn't avoid going. Basically my parents and my family, the structure of my family was such that it seemed like it was impossible not to go, okay? No, but here's the question. These guys were brilliant as far as they were the higher thinkers, and they gave themselves to like thinking. And that was the best they could come with.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm thinking if in fact you are taught theistic evolution, okay, which and they were thoroughly indoctrinated into theistic evolution, okay, such to the point that I had a friend that was in pre-med, and I caught him in the library one time, and I asked him, you know, we're on the theology floor at the library, what are you studying? He said pre-med, and I said, well, like what? He said, oh, evolution. And I said, what about the other 4 classes? What are you studying in them? He looks at me, he goes, that's funny. He said, I'm studying evolution in all the other 4 classes. So
Yeah.
all 5 classes at that time, in pre-med, it was evolution. And then I said, is it as a theory or as a fact? And he smiles again, he goes, as a fact, okay? So we know how much that was being indoctrinated, but what's your understanding of theistic evolution, and how can that possibly be devastating to a worldview?
Well, theistic evolution, as I understand it, is the belief that God used some evolutionary process to create the world. Okay? Just to put it simply. So, even though the Bible teaches us very simply and very straightforwardly, He created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day He rested, theistic evolutionary people think, well, gee, we have all these, you know, all this scientific evidence, all these fossils, you know, all this exploration of the universe. It must have taken him longer, you know, because they
in other words, everybody thinks the world is super old.
Of course.
And then all the dating has proven that.
Right. Except,
aren't you persuaded by all these dating methods?
No, the classic example is sitting in front of the TV on July 25th, 1969. What happened that day, Peter? It's actually the 15th, I think, but...
On 69?
1969.
Huh. I don't know.
What was it? Houston, this is Maury base. Apollo
man
has
landed
landed
on the moon. Yeah, my
Correct.
sister went crazy.
Now, what were they all worried about? They were all worried that they would land in 30 feet of dust.
True.
Because evolution had taught them the universe was so many billion years old, and therefore the moon just hanging out there off of Earth, you know, would have had all this dust and meteor and all this stuff flopping by, and it would have, you know, like a magnet, would have sucked it right up. How much dust was there? 6 inches.
The amount
Maybe
that,
even that, 3 inches.
6,000 years would probably have.
Actually, it was even less than that. You look at, you can see the famous boot print, the foot and the boot print in the Martian, or excuse me, lunar soil, and you know, there's like, it's like, I don't know, the dust of the snow this morning, right? I mean, that's all it is. So when I saw that, I went, what's going on there? Because this was, what was his name? We always watched ABC for some reason. I can't think of his name, but he was, Jules Verne. It was telling us this is exactly what's going to happen. This could possibly, this disaster. Oh, if they sink into the dust, then they can't take off again from the moon surface, the lunar surface, you know, this kind of thing. So even then, science was failing as far as its machinations to get people to believe, you know, science has all the answers. We know what's going on. Well, not this time.
But even now, like the best Catholic theologian, that was a teaching theologian, Cardinal Ruffini, who seemed to be in charge of a lot of the seminary teaching in the Rome and all that for years. He really came against the teaching of evolution. However, he believed the Earth was real old himself. Yeah. He believed those geological charts.
Right, the records and whatnot, sure.
Because of uniformitarianism that taught, everybody bought it.
Yeah. Well, it was the preponderance of science in the first 50 years of the 20th century was not as great as the preponderance of science in the second 50 years of the 20th century. And the classic example, of course, is John F. Kennedy in literally the last speech, or one of the last speeches he ever gave the day before he was assassinated. He talks about how Americans have, like Irish boys of old who would go through the countryside and they'd come up against a wall and they'd all look at each other and they'd throw their hat over the wall. Well, now they had to go over the wall, right? So they had to go get their hats. And America today has thrown its hat over the wall of space, and now we have to finish that exploration. And this classic salesman is what JFK was, you know, and he literally sold the whole baby boomer generation on the idea of science and the pursuit of science, the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of the technical and the scientific to be able to create the kind of nation that we wanted to live in, the kind of culture we wanted to live in.
Well, everybody knows about the Sputnik, right? That was 1958 or something like that. And so there was a massive government push to keep up with the Russians.
Right.
And so that meant pushing science.
Right, exactly.
And that would have been right when the baby boomer generation is at the center of their public education.
Yeah, the oldest baby boomers born in 45, 46 were 10 and 12 years old then. So so they were
the
just
ideal
just
was the nuclear scientist was the ideal, and most all of them were atheists.
Yeah. Well,
it went with the package.
Just imagine what you obviously did in your Catholic school in Wisconsin, the same as we did in our Catholic school out in the, as we lovingly called it, the Soviet of Washington. You know, we'd have to have our air raid drills, right? And under the desks we go, right? Oh yeah, what is it? Billy Joel sang a wonderful song, something about Cold War kids were hard to kill under their desk in an air raid drill.
We did go. We went way down into the basement. But
no, we went under the desks. But so
well, we did the desks, and we went way down.
Yeah, but you had the two prongs here. You had the first prong, if you will, of science, the exploration of space. I personally believe that Kennedy tried to emphasize NASA and the exploration of space to the detriment of the Defense Department, the military-industrial complex, and the creation of bigger and better bombs. In fact, he literally looked at one of the scientists who was showing him a big hole in the ground out in Nevada one day, and he was listening to him, and one of his aides is watching him, and as soon as the scientist is finished and walks away after explaining how wonderfully this, if we had more money, we could make the bombs blow off this much higher kilotons with this much less material. And Kennedy looks at his aide and he says, I don't mind his enthusiasm for what he's doing, but does he have to smile when he's talking about this? So you have the two prongs of death and life put in scientific terms, and Kennedy says, we've thrown our cap over the wall of space and we're going to pursue it. So that's literally trying to go into the heavens, trying to go to God, if you will. Whereas the other one is, you guys better have really effective nuclear deterrent or else. So it all goes to science. That's what we have to do. Okay,
now, getting back to, because you know about that show we did on the evolution of Catholic unbelief.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it was based off of, he did a lot of it based off this priest that went to Temple.
Yeah.
And became an engineer, and then he went back and became a priest later. And he writes about this fella who just died, and the fellow taught at Grace College, which is only 60 miles away.
Oh, I saw the news on that, yeah.
Okay.
What was the book he wrote again?
Well, he wrote the Genesis Flood.
That's right.
In 1961. It was John Whitcomb, and I have a friend that loved Whitcomb, and he actually went to school there in the seminary 9 years.
Oh, wow, so you knew him.
Sat under him all the time.
Really?
And so this priest, Victor Warkowitz, and this guy, Thomas McFadden, referenced this book like this was the revolutionary book. And the fellow writes, the Genesis flood gave the impetus to the modern creationist movement, which was initially comprised of Bible Christians, but now includes Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and conservative mainline Protestants. And then yeah, it's interesting what he writes here. Creationist arguments and research are resisted in Catholic intellectual circles. Many Catholic scientists and intellectuals have succumbed to scientism, putting more faith in the reigning paradigms of science than in the words of sacred scripture. Many of them fear being labeled fundamentalist, a term which derives from a certain Protestant movement and is used in a pejorative sense by biblical critics to belittle those who uphold the literal and obvious sense of Genesis 1 through 11.
I would agree with that assessment.
But
out in the West, it was exactly like that. You had to be cool, you had to be hip, you had to be in the groove for where society was going, and society was going down technological lines. Even in Spokane, Washington, of all places, some of the most creative electronics companies on the planet were located in, of all places, Spokane, Washington. Tektronix, that made the keyboards that you're using to this very day. Idaho Electronics, which became Itron, which made the first PC in the hand. I literally worked on the team that made that first PC in the hand, right? And I remember us sitting at the table in the engineering room and looking with our glasses at the printout for the basic code. Can't remember what the code's called, but it's all 1 and 0s, right? And so I get to read the third line, 0 1 1 1 0 0 1 1. Hold it, 0 0 1 1 or 0 0 0 1? No, 0 0 1 1. Okay, we got a mistake there. That was the binary code right down at the level of making the whole box work. We went through, and we just grunted our way through that for about a week one time, and it made the operating system perfect. So then we were scot-free, because now all the modules that could be added, we knew how to, whatever the term is, how to compute them properly so they would work. So,
but if you were to ask the people that were involved in all this, they would lean toward believing in evolution?
Oh, of course. Although there were some very conservative and orthodox Catholics who I worked with, and there were also some of the Christians, what's the term that he was
fundamentalists?
Using? Yeah, oh yeah, very fundamentalists who were working there. Okay. One of them was the man who was working on the project. It was called the T4000 project, this PC in the hand, and he was my boss, John, I'll give his first name. And I come into his office one day, and he's just sitting there looking at this thing sitting on his desk, and he's in deep, deep thought. And he suddenly looks up at me, and I say, "Interesting, no?" And he goes, "Yeah, this thing can do a lot of damage." And I said, "You're absolutely right. Because you suddenly put the power of a PC into somebody's hand out in the field, what are they going to do with it?" Science. Science not run amok so much as just science sprinting through the, the meme of life.
But the conflict that science presents, okay, and these guys are nailing down, and we're trying to go back, we're trying to understand, why did my sister's friends give me this strong, if I had my sister here, she would know, she would say the same thing, because she remembers. What happens if you're taught to be a good Catholic, to be a good Christian, and believe in Adam and Eve in some fashion, that you have to believe that in some way, and then you have to believe in evolution at the same time, and then you're taught they go together. You know, they're compatible.
Well, why are you taught that? That's the real question.
Well, in a sense, the Catholic Church has kind of backed off on the issue. They kind of say, well, we're not going to really take a position.
Yeah, but 50 years ago, when we were just going into college, it was a different position. They were pushing that heavily. In the West, it was still discreet. It was very discreet. It wasn't, when I went and toured Gonzaga for the first time, you know, I mean, none of that came up at all. It was a question of, okay, what's it going to cost? How long does it take to get a degree? I mean, is it structured for your electives and your required classes that you can do it in 4 years, and this kind of thing? And that's all we were worried about. And by the way, is the degree marketable? When I get out of here, is someone going to say, "Oh, you went to Gonzaga? Oh, really? I want to give you a job." All right, that was the other question.
The teaching of evolution or creation wasn't even on anybody's radar screen. I mean, they may have studied it, but no one talked about it. No one gave it.
It was very subtly brought into the church. I think you were hit out here maybe a 4-year cycle of classes earlier than we were in the West. Or I'd say even 8 years, so maybe a decade earlier here than in the West.
Well, Notre Dame, Notre Dame is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary of John Zahm, Father John Zahm.
The famous John Zahm.
Yeah, and some people write that he was the greatest teacher that Notre Dame ever produced. You know, it's just an opinion. But he is the one that wrote the book in 1894 that was condemned by Rome. Okay, and that book proposed that Augustine and Aquinas taught theistic evolution, and that you can take Darwin's theory, because they were believing it to be true, and it's compatible with Genesis. You can put them together. Now, the Vatican said, "Are you kidding? Of course you can't." And so Notre Dame was threatened, and they had to back off, and they had to say, "Okay, we renounce those beliefs, and we take the book off the shelf." Well, it looks like Notre Dame really didn't do that.
No, okay? Of course not. What's the Vatican going to do? Send a cardinal over to investigate the library and, oh wait, there's dust here. Was there something sitting here?
No, they really didn't do that. And by the time my dad and my uncles came to Notre Dame, they were under Father O'Brien. And O'Brien basically wrote another book that seemed to just say the same thing as Zahm.
Right.
Okay, but it was still kind of more subtle, because everybody knew communism was founded on evolution, and this is during the communist time, so they kind of played it more subtle. But by the time I got there, 1970, it was just radical, pure evolution by the priest.
Yeah.
Okay, and you go, how did they get away with it? Well, they're tracking it back to Zahm. I mean, they're celebrating it next year like he is the priest. And he almost pioneered it in America.
You might tell the audience who he was, just for fun.
Father John Zahm.
Yeah.
He was the priest. They got a dorm at Notre Dame called Zahm Hall. Okay.
And he lived when and where and knew who?
Well, he wrote the book in 1894, and he had been at Notre Dame earlier. You know, he started probably at age 15. You know, he started early, stayed there. They made him the physics professor, even though he didn't know any physics. You know, hey, you got to start teaching physics, start learning it like at age 23. And he went with Theodore Roosevelt on the famous
the exploration
of a river off the Amazon that no one had ever explored. But he became really close to Theodore Roosevelt and other big leaders. And the suspicion is that they liked his theory of evolution. Okay, so what we have here is the Catholic mind, and see, McFadden's theory and the priest theory is addressing the big dilemma in the church, which there's a mass exodus of the young people leaving the church. So for every one person joining the church, Catholic Church, 6 are leaving, and these guys, along with Christian Smith, the big sociologist at Notre Dame, have come to the conclusion that they're leaving because when you teach theistic evolution, it creates a huge problem in the mind, okay? Because you can't believe both. Now, by the time you graduate from these places, they believe you can. But the average person knows you can't. You can't believe in the Adam and Eve of Scripture and in evolution at the same time. They do not mix.
But 20 years before you were hit with this at Notre Dame, the teaching against evolution was reconfirmed by, of all people, Pius XII, right? And he reconfirmed that in what he called Humani Generis, his papal encyclical, literally the creation of man.
True, but don't forget, they used that document as the total excuse to teach. In other words, they picked out of there certain things he said.
Exactly correct.
And they ignored other things.
But several comments he made here, which I thought were quite fascinating. To the laws of evolution, everything is subject. Dogma, church, worship, the books we revere as sacred, even faith itself. And the penalty of disobedience is death.
I mean, he's mocking, or what?
No, the penalty of disobedience of the laws of evolution is death. All right, that's what Pius XII is saying. He says evolution has become such a powerful
That
theology.
if you go against it,
yeah, you die. Now, you die from what? I mean, you die physically. You're dead.
You're ostracized. You're not part.
Well, good for you. You're murdered from the society that is emerging.
You're not part of the. You're not at the table.
Hence, studying more closely the modernists, evolution is described as resulting from the conflict of two forces, one of them tending towards progress. By the way, what did each Democratic so-called presidential, those so-called candidates say they were in the past 6 months of all these debates on TV and whatnot? What was the one word they used to describe themselves? Progressives.
Oh, okay.
We're progressives.
Like La Follette.
I'm progressive. I'm progressive. Yeah. You know, I mean, going back to the former Democratic president, you know, who constantly said we're progressives, progressive this, progressive that.
Which is basically, I believe in evolution, and I follow those principles.
Well, he believes in progress.
Yeah.
So, the conflict of two forces, one tending towards progress, the other towards conservation. The conserving force in the church is tradition, and tradition is represented by religious authority. Gosh, something we don't have in the church today, don't you know? Both by right and in fact, for by right it is the very nature of authority to protect tradition. And in fact, for authority, raised as it is above the contingencies of life, feels hardly or not at all the spurs of progress. So authority properly exercised isn't overwhelmed by or isn't moved by all of the exigencies of life, basically. This is what Pius XII is saying. Now, of course,
that's not what those guys read. They read a couple sentences out of there that
I'm sure they did.
Gave them permission
probably down
to teach evolution. That's because that's what they use. I mean, if you read these guys' books, if you Ruffini was the one that was a little bit against that.
Yeah, at the end of this Humani Generis, of his papal encyclical, Pius did say, the teaching authority of the Church does not forbid that in conformity with the present state of human sciences and sacred theology, research and discussions on the part of men, experiences in both fields, take place with regard to the doctrine of evolution, in as far as it inquires into the origin of the human body as coming from pre-existing and living matter. For the Catholic faith obliges us to hold that souls are immediately created by God.
Yeah, but they use that as an excuse. In other words, the theistic evolution has been taught, I'm sure it was taught at Gonzaga and at Notre Dame, is that God created the world through evolution, and that as we evolved from the monkey and we kept getting better and better, God was waiting for the exact time when we got to the point that he had envisioned man to be. And so Adam was born of his parents, and they were hominids, they were animals, they weren't human. And then God intervened a soul in. Okay, now, but under evolution, he can't intervene materially, because that would totally violate what evolution is.
Correct.
Evolution is this process where God does not intervene.
Yes. The way I read what Pope Pius XII is saying here is he says, man can explore any question they want scientifically, but they have to remember who is the creator of life, the creator of life, not somebody who just let it snap into being and it oozed its way into creation. No, who created life? God the Father Almighty. And immediately upon the creation of man, he endowed him with an immortal soul. That's, in other words, that is the most important tract of thought, theology, philosophy, whatever, in the Holy Roman Catholic Church, because they realize that the very last thing in existence is either, well, it's what is it, the four last things: death, heaven, and hell. Or, well, we have purgatory as well, but some Protestant churches don't believe in that. So that is the final goal of all human beings, is where they spend eternity. So the church stays on that track.
But the church talks you know, they really confuse the matter, because they say that we believe that God put the soul into man. Well, most everybody walks away saying, yeah, through the process of evolution. No, you have to say, here's what happened. God created Adam on the 6th day, you know, and said this is how it happened. You know, on the 6th day, and then Adam was put to sleep, and then the rib came out and turned into Eve.
Correct.
But when you say, oh, and God put the soul into man, everybody's envisioning evolution. They're not envisioning Adam on the 6th day. That would make you a fundamentalist.
Well,
and fundamentalists are basically have been the enemy.
Yeah, as a Roman Catholic, I envision it just exactly as the Bible says it, which is that Adam was put to sleep, and you and I are both missing a rib here, and our technician has that rib.
But as McFadden points out, about 87%, I think if that figure I remember right, of Catholics claim they believe in some type of evolution.
Yeah, of course, because that's what they were taught by people like Dr. William Barry. Ooze. That's what I was taught, but I said, no, I don't believe that.
But you were one of the 13% that rejected it, apparently.
Oh, of course. But then the entire Catholic establishment, the entire so-called Catholic educational establishment, right at the mark 1970 was the year when it began to be seriously and furiously invaded by individuals who believed in evolution, and they believed in essentially progressive ways of thinking. And it was in that time that it hit home, at least in the West, from what I could tell. Again, I'm from what you've told me about your experiences at Notre Dame, it was maybe, it wasn't a decade earlier, it wasn't 60, but it was somewhere around, well, when was the Land O'Lakes?
67.
67.
When Notre Dame became separated from...
64 to 67, which would correspond precisely to the time period of the Second Vatican Council.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that whole meme of progressivism, you know, we're progressive, you know, we think we're modernists, we think in the future, we live in the modern world, blah, blah, blah. That ran over, just like, you know, Sherman through Atlanta is what the progressivist agenda did to the Vatican Council. And most people don't realize that.
Well, here's the question I want to ask. Okay, so the big shock to people our age is that the culture accepts, or the younger people accept, Mayor Pete Buttigieg being married to a guy and kissing a guy out in the open, and they think that's normal, yet a lot of us in our generation find it repulsive. But what is the potential connection? Okay, so you send your son to Notre Dame, let's say, and he's taught this theistic evolution. He's taught that God created the world through evolution, and yet the Bible's still true, you know, and Adam and Eve is still true, but evolution is also true. What do you see could be happening? What could that do to your son?
Well, cognitive dissonance eventually creates, I suppose, some sickness, some illness, right? Whether it be mental, whether it be physical, whether it be a combination thereof, or it hardens a heart to the point where that individual becomes an effective tool for whoever is trying to manipulate society with the creation of and promotion of people like Peter Buttigieg.
Yeah, because once you, these things are, I mean, if you study Bronson, okay, now your dad could have lived in Bronson Hall. I mean,
I guarantee you he did.
Okay, okay, because I grew up at a very young age, you know, Bronson Hall. My dad lived in Bronson Hall. You know, we would go there when I was like 5, you know, and visit. And Bronson was considered by a lot of people the greatest Catholic thinker of the 19th century. And when Darwin's books came out, he attacked it and said, this is the enemy of Christianity. I mean, there's no way Christianity, we can't allow any of this to get into our thinking. And then Zom, 20 years later,
writes the book.
Has totally merged them. And I believe Bronson's correct. So once you say you can believe, oh, they're compatible, and you can believe both, well, then that sets the stage that you can believe that sodomy is Christian. It's like,
well, of course.
How can sodomy be Christian? It's like the most condemned sin in the Bible. Oh, trust us.
Well, there's 2 most condemned sins in the Bible. They are
Well, I'm just saying that Jesus used sodomy as the example. Your sins are so bad, the judgment on you is going to be even worse than Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay, then jumping forward to who was the Catholic theologian in the Renaissance who wrote about the levels of hell? Dante. Dante's two worst sins were what again?
Well, the worst was treason, and like Judas Iscariot. And then the next two above that were usury and sodomy.
Correct. So my suspicion is that evolution plays a key part in the promotion of both usury and sodomy, simply because in an evolutionary society, everything has to change, right?
So that's the idea. And even doctrine has to change, and even God can change.
You can't change a society without changing the doctrines. All right.
Usually,
so,
of course.
So the society you and I grew up in was a middle class. I suppose both of us were upper middle class. Certainly I was. And you know, you go to school, you learn a skill from the university. You take that skill, you go out and you quote make money, right? And there's just a simple way to do that. I mean, it's like your father was a lawyer, correct? Mm-hmm. My father was a business graduate from Notre Dame, and then became a manager in the Weyerhaeuser Corporation, but didn't get the big mill to manage. And so it's like, now what do I do? Oh, you can go manage this little mill down in California. Well, that would have been a good thing, because the family would have gone through the necessary crises to be able to grow up. But that didn't happen. So instead he tried to manage a little teeny mill, you know, that was just outside of town. And of course they ran out of trees, believe it or not. It's like, well, we ran out of trees. How do we do that? Well, because we didn't follow Grandpa's admonition to only cut so many million board feet every year, which is literally what my grandfather wrote out on a legal piece of paper, right? Okay, so, you know, reality is we're out of trees, now what happens? Well, he became a stockbroker. So, but he lived by the system. You know, the system of Gonzaga, or, well, he also went to Gonzaga Prep, interestingly. So that system of the Jesuits of Gonzaga and the Holy Cross Fathers of Notre Dame, it taught him, you know, play the system, do the rules, follow the rules, and you'll be fine. All right, well, do any of those rules that our parents followed basically in the 1950s and 60s, are any of those rules applicable to, quote, being successful or living successfully here now in this country called the United States in the 2020s?
Well, we've evolved out of that.
Ah, well said. So it only took 70 years, or in this case, it took, well, let me see, it took 50 years, because in 1970, because that's when the real hit first came. So, so I suspect that there are usurious classes of individuals who already algorithmically have figured out, okay, well, let me see now here. We started the big hit on credit in the Reagan administration circa 1981. So it's not going to quite go 50 years this time because we had too many blips along the way. So are we getting to the end now of a credit cycle in the usurious class? And they realize, oh boy, okay, we got to change stuff. Well, so what do you have to do? Well, you have to bring in major social, political, cultural, and economic change to be able to flip that debt, is what it comes down to. Who are going to be your, you know, your weapon carriers for that kind of stuff? Well, today it's who? Well, I mean, obviously it's a guy like Peter Buttigieg. All you have to do is look at the main contributors to his campaign, the people who are saying good things about him, and you know who's backing him. So that's where that's going. And the idea, I don't know, I've never understood the fascination some people have with what I call, I don't use the words, the modern words they use, what is simply in the Bible called abomination. Let's just call it what it is. But St. Paul warned about this, and that's the word he coined. And he warned about this 2,000 years ago. So they probably had the same problem in usurious Rome, don't you think? Are we just repeating usurious Rome? Oh, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. No, I'm sorry. Well, history repeats and repeats and repeats.
They pretty much say that Luther was reacting to the corruption of the Medici's.
Yeah, it was the Medici.
Corruption.
Yeah, I spent many an interesting day in Medici, Florence, just walking around and looking at this, you know, this huge, city-wide, city-sized museum. That's all it was. There was nothing going on there but places to buy coffee, you know, and pensions to sleep in, you know, or big hotels if you want to do that, and then beautiful churches. That was nice. There were beautiful churches there, but you know, museums, the Uffizi Gallery, just stuff full of all kinds of Renaissance artists, Michelangelo and the whole group, and going back before then. And that was it. That was the whole town. And I thought, this is interesting. Well, in Rome we have this too, but Rome is also, you know, the center of the government. There's New Rome over here. They call Eru, A-E-U-R, the new area of Rome that's all the banking and whatnot, and then just beyond that is all this manufacturing area. And I didn't see that in Florence at all. So I thought, yeah, that's kind of odd. Huh.
The Medicis. Now, before we only got so much time, but you told me that story one time about seeing the disproof of evolution, but you saw it on the rocks, or remember that?
Oh, it's a video I've been trying to find.
But I thought you had a friend that showed you, that showed that the Earth was young.
Right.
Is that, you remember?
Well, what it was is in the late 70s, it's funny how this, you know, at the moment when the acceleration of the change of society with evolution is going on, and at exactly the same moment in the 1970s, there's a engineer who goes into coal mines in the West.
Yeah.
Is the Williston Basin in the Dakotas? I think it is.
Yeah. Williston is where they had the. That was where they were finding the oil. People were going up there to.
Yeah, but they also had coal there too, and then the next basin over, what they called the whole front range of the Rockies. You know, the eastern slope. They call it the overthrust belt, is what they call it. And so they have these huge pools of coal, you know, that are so many hundred feet deep. So they dig into them, and they form these mines, and you know, you go down, you literally are in an elevator going down, and all of these levels, according to scientists, correlated to the Triassic period, the Jurassic period, the Precambrian, the Cambrian, you know, on and on.
Pliocene, all that, the geological table.
So this guy thought about it and says, let's try this. So he went into all of these levels in these coal mines, you know, the days off with his son, and they would walk down the hallways of the coal mine, and they would say, oh, here's a piece of wood over here, is a fossilized log of some sort. They'd dig it out, and they would find a little radioactive isotope. Don't ask me what that is, but you know, it's a little purple thing that you see on the wood, and okay. So they took all of these samples from the various mines, from the Dakotas all the way into the Wyoming and down through Colorado, and they sent these isotopes, they'd dig them out, and of course they'd index them. They'd send them off to labs and say, do radiocarbon-14 dating on this for me, please, you know, for so many $50, $60 per sample or whatever it was. All right, it all comes back, and all the samples are radiocarbon-14 dated using modern, you know, evolutionary science. They're dated to 7,400 to 8,200 years, all of them.
And yet it's supposed to be even the Cambrian.
Oh,
it's supposed to be like 600 million years.
Oh, all that stuff. What the scientists tell us, and this guy, you know, he does this research. He just does a I wonder if, you know, and he goes and he does it. Then he writes a paper on it, 20 or 30 pages of whatever, and he submits it to some scientific meeting or whatever in America back in that time, just as the Reagan administration was breaking. And he presents his paper. And the reaction was?
They didn't want to hear it. Probably.
The reaction was dead silence. Nobody responded at all. Absolutely nobody responded.
Yeah, under Stalin's Soviet Union, there'd probably be a better response.
But yeah, it'd be probably the report of an automatic weapon of some sort.
They weren't going to hear that either.
No. But so and I did actually, I was looking on the computer last fall, and I did find this film on YouTube, and like an idiot, I should have immediately downloaded it just so I could have it, but I didn't. And so I've looked for it again now here in 2020. I can't find it anywhere.
I mean, the guy did. So that paper is out.
No, paper. He had a 45-minute, hour-long film of him walking through all these. You know, he showed exactly what he did. His son was walking around carrying the camera, right?
Right. So that it's completely debunking this idea that the Earth is super old.
Oh yeah, of course. And it uses the modern, you know, scientific method, the most common, well-known. If you say radiocarbon-14 dating, everybody knows that.
But this is why Catholics looked at fundamentalists like they were halfway insane. I mean, just like believing in the flat Earth. I mean, that's how they viewed him.
I actually have met some fundamentalists who tell me they still believe in the flat
Earth.
There are some. They give a very interesting argument. I'm thinking, well, maybe that could be true, but I mean, didn't St. Paul say the circle of the Earth?
Yeah, that's foolishness. But when you heard the word fundamentalist, what generally did you think? Why they were called a fundamentalist? Was it not because they believed in six-day creation and the Earth was young? Isn't that the main reason?
Yes, but were a lot of them out in the West.
Yeah.
A lot of them lived in the West, particularly in the inland West. The area around Spokane was called the Inland Empire. There were very conservative groups of Christians there. To this day, there is a very conservative Roman Catholic group that is headquartered at the original Mount St. Michael's seminary of the Jesuits, which was the largest seminary in the West for the Jesuits out there. And they had no more seminarians, or they moved them down to Gonzaga, where they have what's called Bea House, named after Cardinal Bea, the wonderful, liberal, happy Jesuit cardinal of Vatican II. And so this group lives there. They're very, very conservative, very, very Latin Mass oriented, and they don't, most of the dioceses where they have other churches, they don't recognize them.
Well, do you think they're young Earth creationists then, too?
Oh yeah, they would absolutely be that.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. So the very, very conservative Mass of the Ages, Latin Mass groups, the majority of them absolutely believe in
because these guys, this priest and these guys were saying there for a while, you would hardly ever find a young Earth six-day creationist Catholic
in the Novus Ordo Church. Remember,
right, but there was a gap there. You just wouldn't find them.
Yeah, the church itself has been in not open schism, but schism by any other name since the Second Vatican Council. You have not large groups, but significant groups of Catholics who simply just don't even listen to Rome anymore. They follow the teachings of the Council Fathers from the First Vatican Council, which is 1864, and they follow the teachings of some of the people in the 20th century. I don't think they'll follow Cardinal Ruffini's beliefs in billions of years old Earth, right? But they'll follow his teachings on the philosophies and theologies of the Church, sure, but they'll just kind of brush that off. So the thing, you can tell that this group is becoming more and more powerful or concerning to the Novus Ordo Church, because you have somebody like Bishop Barron, the famous Bishop Barron, who is now, crying that, oh, this is terrible, this comeback of the Latin Mass, this is terrible. He can't
Well, he believes in theistic evolution.
Well, of course he does. He's a theist. He probably doesn't believe in theistic. He probably just believes in straightforward evolution.
No, he has to believe
We all came from ooze, all right?
He has to believe it. Now, the number one Catholic creationist organization, which just started, is the Kolbe Institute, named after Maximilian Kolbe.
Yeah.
And Hugh Owens, he came into town here one time, maybe a couple years ago, and I had lunch with him. But he brought up at the luncheon that the founder, the person they followed as an institute, as far as a scientist, was Wilder Smith. And I'm going, what? Wilder Smith, I've listened to a lot of his tapes on evolution and creation. I said, he's a Protestant. And he goes, yeah, he was a Protestant, but on his deathbed he converted.
They all did, I'm sure.
In other words, there was hardly any Catholics at all that were supporting six-day creationists.
Right, but jump back quickly 50 years to Theodore Hesburgh, and he wants to make Notre Dame the preeminent Catholic institution of anything in the North American continent. I mean, it was
the Harvard of the Midwest.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he was well beyond that in his mind by that point in time. And so he's going to have Notre Dame graduates. He's going to put him in every possible stronghold of decisions for our culture. Okay, and the only way they're going to get in there is if they believe in evolution, and not just theistic evolution. I mean, just straightforward, get it done evolution. And that's what Notre Dame was cranking out. Gonzaga started doing it in great numbers by the 80s. So we were 10, 12 years, 15 years behind you.
In other words, they're going to be better servants of the empire if they have an evolutionary worldview.
Well, they have to, because if they believe that they are children of God, that they are uniquely made, and there is a plan for them by God the Father Almighty, they're not going to do this stuff. But they don't believe that. They believe, okay, well, I can work for this company for a while, and that'll make my resume look good, and then I can work for this one, and honey, why don't you work over here, and you know, and then by the time we're 30-something, we'll be ready to have kids. And all the crash and burn of that stuff that's going on now is just fantastic. But I digress to another subject.
But there is a movement, like what we're talking about. We only have a couple minutes left. There is a movement. You don't see that. You don't see as much hope for America, or where do you see the hope?
Well, no. The interesting thing is that you know, poor Pope Francis, who's basically getting it from both sides. Although we don't see that here. We just see this. You know, he's this liberal pope and blah blah blah. I mean, some of the stuff, I'll read it maybe on the next show, but some of the stuff he said is even more conservative than Pope Pius XII, believe it or not. And, you know, he criticizes constantly his critics here in America. So that tells me that the Vatican is waking up to the fact that this dog don't hunt no more. And it's time for a new paradigm. It's time for something new.
Out of America.
Out of the church itself, the whole church.
Yeah,
and not what he's promoting. Everybody thought that with the Amazon Synod, Pope Francis was going to release a document from the Synod that would approve the idea of married priests or women deacons or all this kind of stuff. No, not at all. In fact, all of his so-called supporters on the left were just like, they're aghast, like, oh my God, he did. Pope Francis, you know, the need for us to think creatively and progressively here, I think you should consider these ideas. You know, it's like, yeah, shut up.
Yeah, but I do think, and we only have a minute left, I do think that if the church doesn't remove this, Ruffini, I think, even called it a heresy.
Correct.
If they don't straighten out their creation, you know, if they don't contend for the faith at the point of creation, and they just kind of let it go, and it naturally goes to evolution.
Right, and from there it goes into debauchery of
You're not going to
society.
find good leadership.
No, it doesn't have leadership now.
Yeah, because if you can't get creation right, how are you going to have leadership? So this is the show Israel with Paul Ford O'Neill and Peter Helland.